great deal of inequity and injustice in our country specifically, and certainly around the world. And those are things we need to be aware of and not fight back against.
So if I was to encapsulate the belief, is that there is a great deal of injustice and inequity in the world, and we should correct that.
Absolutely. And the first step to correcting that is simply being aware of it and acknowledging it. A lot of us like to bury our heads in the sand and say, all that happened long ago, it's not happening now, so it's done, we fixed it. And clearly we haven't fixed it.
On a scale from 1 to 7, how confident would you say that your belief is true?
7.
And on a scale from 1 to 7, how important is it for you to believe in true things?
I'm sorry, a car was going by.
Oh, that's right. How important is it for you to believe in things that are true and real?
Oh, gee, those are probably both 6s or 7s. I think we all want to believe in things that are true and real, and then we, of course, all have our own understandings of what is true and what is real.
How do you know that your belief is true?
That's a tough one. I started off saying I'm very much scientific, method-based, very evidence-based, but that really doesn't come into it when we're talking about equity, when we're talking about justice. So that becomes much more of a gut feeling, and discussing with other folks and trying to understand their point of view and what they're seeing in terms of injustice and inequity.
So the primary reason why you believe the belief and believe that the belief is true is via gut feeling.
Unfortunately, yes.
Is knowing something via gut feeling, is that a reliable way to know whether something is true?
In a vacuum, no. But it's definitely a guidepost. And so then from there, you start working towards gathering your evidence so that, and be open to change.
Maybe this will help. Let's say Jimmy is sitting next to you, and Jimmy believes that we don't need to strive for equity, we don't need to strive for justice because that's not a problem. That we live in a country that is not an issue, and the reason why Jimmy believes that is he has a gut feeling that that's how the country works, that's how the world works, and that's how he's come to believe his belief. I'm a third party. I'm hearing you and Jimmy discuss your belief versus his belief, and his belief is basically diametrically opposed to your belief. How, just me sitting here, how would I be able to decide what is true, what is real, what is a real belief, a true belief?
Between the three of us in a vacuum, you wouldn't be able to tell, because both of us are coming from that same basis of gut feeling, of history and things that we know. But I would, and Jimmy's feelings, gut feeling on this are absolutely valid. In his experience, it's not an issue. So my first step would be, well, let's try and investigate some other people's experiences that maybe you haven't experienced. Let's go out and look in a community that's outside of your social circle, outside of your community, and see if you still understand the same things afterwards. And I'd have to be willing to change my beliefs as well.
Yeah. So you've experienced inequity and injustice, and let's say Jimmy has not, for whatever reason, experienced that. Is there a greater truth there? Does it necessarily matter what you've experienced versus what Jimmy's experienced to the question of whether there's inequity or whether there's injustice in the world? Or is it based on experience of that?
Inequity and injustice exists in the world whether we believe it or not.
So it's an objective, universal belief.
There is some objective reality out there. It's how we can comprehend it that becomes subjective.
So it seems that you believe in an objective truth, a universal truth. And in this sense, how could we get closer to whatever that is, whether it is what Jimmy believes, that there's not inequity and injustice in the world, and you obviously do believe that. And if the universal objective truth, let's say, is that, which you believe, I'd like to believe that. And if it's what Jimmy believes, well, I'd rather believe that. Let's say I just want to believe what's true and real. How can I find out? How would I be able to discover that?
I don't have a solid answer for you. In the specific instance that we're talking about, how you would figure this out would be to talk to a lot of people from disparate and varied backgrounds and try and understand, is there inequity in their experience? Is there injustice in their experience? And you have to go into this with the understanding that if inequity and injustice is out there in anyone's experience, then it exists.
If an experience is experienced by a person, then that makes that belief true? I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from.
It makes it true for them, yes.
True for them. Okay. So we're saying that at that point it's a subjective truth, it's not a universal objective truth?
Yeah, there are things like, does gravity exist?
Okay.
That's going to be a purely 100% objective truth. But getting your foot chopped off hurts. Some people may have no feeling in their legs, right? So now it becomes subjective. For me, I know that it would hurt. For them, it might not hurt. So there's a subjective aspect to it. And injustice and inequity kind of falls into that realm of there is a necessary subjective part of it.
Maybe this will help. So these box of Clean Breath Mentos, they're much better than Tic Tacs.
I have an old-fashioned from yonder. It's better.
Yeah. There's an even or odd number of breath fresheners in this box. Let's say I don't know what the truth is. I don't know if it's even or odd. Let's say you don't know if the number is even or odd. But could we agree that there is a universal objective truth there that doesn't matter what I believe and it doesn't matter what you believe, that it is what it is?
Yeah, as long as we both agree on the meaning of even and odd, then we can absolutely agree that there's either an even or an odd number in that box.
Maybe we should use a different example then. There's the sun right there. Could we agree that the sun exists? It's here. It's there.
We are experiencing it. I think we could agree that, yes.
Okay. So could we agree? So we're agreeing that we both see the sun, or are we agreeing that there is something, that there is that ball of fire in the sky that's functioning in nuclear fusion or however it works? So I guess what I'm saying is, if we don't exist, will the sun keep on shining? Will it keep on working? Will it keep on doing what it does? Or does it require our existence to do that?
Yes and no. I would like to believe that, yeah, there is an objective sun out there that just exists, period. But if there's nothing to perceive it, how can you say that it exists? There's nothing to claim that it exists.
So if we don't exist, then nothing exists?
Yes.
How do we know that?
Or how do we test it? I don't know. I don't know how to make myself not exist so I can test this theory.
What do you think, and this is an interesting conversation, I haven't had it quite like this before, and it's interesting. What do you think the better default position is? Is that the sun exists, and whether I don't exist, it exists, or the sun exists, and if I don't exist, then the sun ceased to exist? Just how you know about how the world works.
I think the better assumption, better being the operative word, is that the sun exists, objectively.
Yeah.
Because that that provides for continuity after we cease to exist, and we like to believe in the whole continuity of things. But you're getting into Schrodinger's box and the cat, and whether the cat is alive or dead, and it depends on observability.
So you're saying that the sun could exist for one person and not for another person?
Theoretically, it might be possible.
Could there be an even or odd number of breath fresheners in this box?
Yes.
Could there be an even number for you and an odd number for me? And they're both true?
That is probably possible in some ways of looking at the universe.
How could there be an even number of breath fresheners for you and an odd number of breath fresheners for me?
Well, I'm no particle theorist. I'm no quantum theorist, but there's a whole different ways of looking at the universe and how the universe is very much based on perception.
If there can be an even or number of breath fresheners for me and an odd number for you, and the sun could exist for one person and not exist for another person, could it be said then that with your belief that there's inequity and injustice, and someone believes that there's not an inequity and injustice, that both are equally true?
Yeah, both are subjective and equally true in individual experiences.
Are they
Yes.
are they equally true objectively?
It's very difficult to pin down objectivity in this circumstance.
Are all beliefs true?
Almost. I can't think of any belief that couldn't be true somehow.
Is there false beliefs?
Yeah, there has to be. There have to be beliefs that are that have internal contradictions. I think we would have to define those as false. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but those things have to exist.
If everything can be true, and really, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. If everything can be true, how can there be a false belief? I mean, it seems like if I believe it, if I believe there's an even number, if I believe the sun doesn't exist or does exist, then that belief, by definition of me believing it, from what I understand what you're saying, makes it true.
Yeah, if you have absolutely no experience with the sun,
Yeah.
then for you it does not exist. And
If I don't have experience with the sun, then it does not exist or does not exist for me.
it does not exist for you, and as far as you know, it doesn't exist until you start interacting with other intelligences and try and understand their experiences, and they will tell you of their experiences with the sun, and then maybe you can, through their experience, understand that, hey, this thing they call the sun probably actually exists.
I'm trying to understand how me understanding someone else's experience or not understanding someone else's experience has anything to do with whether the sun exists. I'm trying to understand that.
Well, if you have absolutely no experience with the sun,
Mm-hmm.
no input,
Okay.
no data, no anything to give you any reason to believe that sun exists,
Mm-hmm.
why would you believe it exists?
I might not.
Until
but how,
someone else tells you, hey, there's this thing called the sun.
I'm still trying to get there. I'm trying to understand how my experience of seeing the sun or my experience of not seeing the sun or someone telling me about the sun or someone not telling me about the sun has anything to do with whether there is a sun. I'm really trying to understand. I'm trying to get there.
I understand you're trying to identify that there is some objective reality outside of your brain.
Well, I think what you're telling me that there's not.
I'm telling you that there might be, but it's very difficult to identify. So the way we identify those things is reach out to others and communicate with other intelligences. You and I sitting here talking to try and figure out how they think and what they perceived and what have they perceived that's different.
Maybe this. If I've never seen the sun, and then no one showed me the sun, but then someone shows me, let's say, a video of the sun. At that point, can I say the sun exists, or do I still need to see it with my own eyes and physically look at the sun.
Well, you now have some evidence. How much you trust that evidence is to a large degree up to you and whatever your other experiences are. But yeah, now you have at least a crack in that facade you had of the sun doesn't exist, or never having had a concept of the sun before. Now someone has given you this concept, so the crack in the edifice is forming, and you may go investigate further.
So the reason why I do this show, podcast, is that we seem to live in a time where people have very different beliefs, sometimes very
Super
polar
polarized.
opposite beliefs. Yeah. And it seems to be getting us into trouble in this present moment. And I'm thinking about, I know we're talking about the sun, we're talking about breath fresheners, we're talking about, things like that.
We're getting a little esoteric.
We're getting a little esoteric. But what I'm thinking about, bringing it back home, is that if half the country believes that vaccines work, and half the country believes that vaccines are dangerous, and we all have our personal truths, it sounds like you're telling me that if I believe that vaccines are dangerous and are going to kill me, then vaccines are dangerous and are going to kill me, and the belief is true. And if I believe, no worries.
I'll fix that on my way out.
Oh, good. If I believe that vaccines are helpful and vaccines prevent viruses, then they do that. And that's dependent on my belief, and it's not dependent on anything objective. I think that's what you're telling me.
That's not what I'm telling you.
Okay.
But I can see exactly how you got there. But and
I want to know what you're telling me. Please tell me what is different.
What's different when we start bringing this down to the level of efficacy of vaccines? If you believe that vaccines don't work, that's a valid belief. But then you have to explain, why is it that you believe this? What information have you absorbed that has made you believe this? Because there is piles of evidence out there that will change your belief.
But how does my belief about whether vaccines are actually something that work or vaccines are something that kill me, how does that change whether vaccines work or whether vaccines kill me?
Doesn't.
My belief about the sun, how does that change whether the sun exists?
Your belief about the sun not existing in our theoretical universe was because you had zero data about anything called a sun. There was no reason for you to believe in a sun. There was no information.
And if I had no information about vaccines, none, could it be said that vaccines work or don't work still? Or is that dependent on what I believe about it?
If you had no data on vaccines, then the concept of vaccine wouldn't exist in your mind. So you wouldn't be able to think vaccines don't work.
So if I had no concept of vaccines in my mind, that would affect whether the vaccines work or don't work. Even me personally, I don't know anything about vaccines. I'm not saying what other people know. I don't know anything about vaccines. But if I don't know anything about them, then there is no answer to whether they work or don't work. I'm really trying to get there.
Yes, in the universe of your mind, vaccines don't exist. So there is no vaccines work and vaccines don't work.
Yes, you mentioned the universe of my mind. Is there an objective truth, whether vaccines work or don't work, that don't depend on what I believe about it?
Right, but we're back to trying to identify, is there anything outside of your mind?
I'm trying to identify whether there's anything outside of my mind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we try and reach out to other intelligences to try and understand, is this all solipsism? Is this all just me spinning around in my brain? Or are there other intelligences out there? And is there potentially some objective reality that we can all agree on?
So you're kind of the brain in the box kind of thing. You're saying that are you saying that we are, everything is subjective, it's all perception, whatever we perceive is true, because if I'm the only mind that exists, I'm in a box, and if I want to believe it, I believe it, and that's That's what you're saying. It's true.
But it's true until evidence proves it otherwise, or it's also false until evidence proves it otherwise.
How could there be evidence to prove it otherwise? Because if I believe it, it's true. It doesn't seem like there could be any evidence that could prove it otherwise.
Well, if you believe, you can't believe that there is no sun.
I can't believe it?
No, because you've just defined the sun. So now that you've defined this thing called the sun, it has to exist somewhere in your imagination. There's this thing called the sun. So you can't believe there is no sun, but you can not believe in a sun because the concept of sun has never been presented to you. But as soon as it's presented to you,
so in my mind, which is the only thing that exists, if I believe that there's a sun, then there's a sun. If I don't believe that there's a sun, then there's not a sun. If this belief that you have about how the world works, if it was incorrect, I'm not saying it was incorrect, but if it was incorrect, how would you know it?
Scientific basis. You form a hypothesis, you test your hypothesis, and you interpret the results. How
could we test that? How could we test whether my mind is the only thing in the universe and whatever I define as true is true? How could that be tested?
It's been a long time since I took that Intro to Philosophy course back in undergrad. But this is something that people have grappled with for millennia.
I mean, it's not a trick question. It does seem like it would be a very difficult test to perform.
Right.
Is it useful, do you think? I'd like to know what you think. Is it useful to have a belief, any belief, that can't be shown to be incorrect if it's incorrect? I'm not saying if it's incorrect, but if it's incorrect, is it useful to have a belief that can't be shown to be incorrect? Because if a belief can't be shown to be incorrect, then how do we really know that it's true?
Is it useful? It's useful for millions, billions of believers in God on this planet. To a large degree, our major religions are Christianity, Judaism, Muslim. They all share this idea of an omnipotent God that you can't interact with. And there's no way to disprove that this being exists. But does it do you any good? I don't know.
On a scale, in the beginning of our talk, I said on a scale from 1 to 7, how confident you are in your belief, you said a 7. And then I asked you, on a scale from 1 to 7, how important is it for you to believe in true things? Do you want to change that number? Or do you want to keep it at a...
Yeah, that number is absolutely a goal. I seek out the truth, and I hope everyone else is always also seeking out the truth. Accumulating new evidence, forming new ideas, and changing my mind when what I've believed has been shown to be wrong.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you talking with me. Yeah?
It's been fun.
Yeah, good. This is great, yeah. The show's called Being Reasonable, and it's also a podcast which most people listen to, and love for you to check it out. And I don't know if this was quite the conversation you thought you'd have, but I do appreciate you talking with me.
Can we go do some mushrooms now or
yeah,
something?
Exactly.